No Game, No Life, Volume 6, Chapter 1, Part 2. 3 minus 1 equals hopeless. It was such an age, the Great War. Humans were frail and powerless. They had to survive as a race, not individuals. No one could afford individual emotion. One was for all, everyone had to work for the collective. In service of this, they were constantly forced to choose options that were perhaps not the best, but more expedient. Using all their cunning and reason, humans survived. No, kept running. Caked in mud and ash, trampling every small joy, leaving corpses behind. Until someday there would be a full stop. With this strategy, they sacrificed one to save two, cut off the few for the many. Even if it meant leaving someone behind, they would prioritize saving everyone left in the village. They lacked the luxury of choice. The one who had insisted on these rules had been Riku himself. It was too late for Gil to regret, but without looking back or slowing down, when he'd reached the relative safety of the woods, suddenly Riku was assailed by the sensation that his stomach was dropping out. The face of the man in his memory grew unidentifiable. An unbearable sense of loss and a violent disgust at something swelled within him simultaneously. Ivan, a generation older than himself, had been a brave, considerate, helpful man. Among those Riku's age, there was not one who wasn't indebted to the man. He'd been positively smitten with his wife and quite shy until they married. And already, Riku was recalling him in the past tense. Riku! Hey, Riku! Ele, tears still staining the corners of his eyes, grabbed Riku's shoulder and shook it violently. You can't keep trying to take everything on yourself. You'll implode. But Riku maintained his dim, unlit, ghost-like gaze. When that happens, someone will take over for me. At these words, delivered matter-of-factly, Lei fell silent. Judging that there was no one chasing them, the two began walking. Their feet were heavy as they headed for the village. And not just because of the heaps of ash. It was what they'd left behind, what they were left with, what they'd have to endure from here on. Hey, Riku, this age, someday it will end, won't it? They didn't know. It was the same question Ivan had screamed at the end. Riku didn't say anything, instead looking up at the red sky where the blue ash danced. Then something crossed his mind. Words someone had said. Every night gives way to light. Watching the bits of detritus drifting through the air with their soft blue glow, quietly piling up. Yeah, it'll end. If he didn't believe that, if he didn't hold that faith right now, the weight would bring him to his knees. The expedition had lasted 4 days, all told. Their return destination, the village, lay beyond the wasteland where the blue ash fell, deeper into the back country than even the snow-laden woods. At the base of a razor-steep crag, a cave was hidden. From the outside, it looked just like any old beast den. But when one went inside, decaying pillars loomed, and musty lanterns hung here and there. Riku took one and lit it with the tinder box he produced from his breast pocket. Its dim, orange light guided them into the cave, through the tunnel dug at its end. Proceeding farther, mindful of the traps set to ward off beasts, they saw a wall constructed of several sturdy logs. It was the gate, installed to stop the odd wolf or bear that wandered past the traps. Of course, if the intruder was of another race, such a bafflement was of utterly no comfort. But still, Riku approached the gate and knocked, forcefully and in a predetermined rhythm, and waited. Shortly, the gate creaked slowly inward, and a boy in a pelt coat peeked out. Welcome back. Thank you for your hard work. Riku and Alei just nodded as they passed. Mr. Ivan? Riku silently shook his head. The guard inhaled, and as if to hold something back, he repeated to Riku, Thank you for your hard work. Beyond the gate, the cave spread wide. Presently, it served as the hideout for almost 2,000 people. They had sourced drinking water from a spring deep in the cavern, and they even raised livestock in an open-air enclave. The enclave had two entrances, the other connected to an inlet from the sea from which they could harvest salt and fish. For humans who would be done if they ran into anything outside, this was considered a relatively secure habitat. Its thick stone walls could withstand at least the odd stray shot from the feuds of other races. That may have been an innocently optimistic assessment of the village, but Riku climbed the jointed wooden steps and strode inside. The residents working in the square noticed him and tossed their gazes his way. And from among them, a girl dashed up to him. She was small and thin, but her bright hair and blue eyes blazed with the light of life even in the cave. Approaching him, she hollered, You're so late! Just how much do you want to make me worry, little brother? Believe it or not, we did hurry. Riku answered briskly and dropped the load from his back onto the ground. Corden, has anything changed while we've been gone? Call me big sister. How many times do I have to tell you, you little... Pouting and lecturing, the girl called Corden nodded fiercely. Don't worry, though. At the very least, there hasn't been anything bad enough to report. Now, will you take off that nasty cloak and pelt? I'll drop them in the wash for you. Dusting off Riku's head unreservedly, Corden insisted. You too, Alei. Thanks for all you've done. Corden took Riku's cloak and other gear and addressed Alei, who stood behind him. Then she noticed that someone else who should be there wasn't. Before she could ask, Alei answered. Ivan's dead. Corden wrenched her face just as a voice rose from the corner of the square. Daddy! Riku turned to see a little girl running toward him, tripping over herself. Alei, seeing her, took in a short breath. The girl who'd exhausted herself on her approach, seeing Riku, beamed and shouted, Where's Daddy? Riku didn't answer. Ivan's daughter. Her sparkling blue eyes, much like her father's. Nona. Riku! Where's Daddy? Nona asked again, tugging at Riku's clothes. Her sunny face, nevertheless, seemed somehow clouded. You see, Nona... Alei opened his leaden mouth to explain, but Riku motioned to stop him. Likewise, Corden was attempting to get between her little brother and Nona, but Riku pierced her with his eyes. He touched his chest to check. It was all right. It was locked. In the same matter-of-fact tone as always, Riku delivered the news. Ivan, Daddy's not coming back. The girl opened her eyes wide, as if she didn't understand. But when Riku went no further, she wobbled back. Large tears could be seen welling in the corners of her eyes, and her little lips trembled. Why? Daddy promised he'd come back. He said, be a good girl and wait for me. I've been a good girl. I kept my promise. So why isn't Daddy coming back? Because he's dead. You're a liar! Nona's shriek echoed through the cave. Daddy promised me he'd come back. How long had it been? Riku vaguely wondered. How long since a voice so tragic failed to move his heart in the slightest? Ivan tried to keep his promise, but we ran into a demonia, and he threw it off and got left behind. I don't care about that. Why wouldn't Daddy come back? Nona was right, Riku thought. Why and for whom did her father had died were of no concern to her. Her beloved father wasn't coming back. No amount of explanation could ever change that fact. Daddy said humans would win. We will. That's what Ivan fought for, with everything he had. He fought to protect us, so we all might win. How long had it been? Riku vaguely wondered. How long had he been able to lie so blithely? Nona wrinkled up her little face. That's not winning. If you call that winning, Nona! A sharp voice and a hand extended from behind the girl cut short what would have followed. Namely, I wish it was you who died. The gaunt young woman, Nona's mother, once Ivan's wife, appeared out of nowhere. Sympathetically, she clamped a hand over her daughter's mouth and looked into Riku's face. Seeing that her eyes held neither a grudge nor hatred, Riku swiftly touched his chest again. It's all right. It's fine. Riku... Martha, Nona's mother, pronounced his name in a scratchy voice. I'm sorry. Riku felt an urge to say it aloud, but swallowed the words. Ivan acted as a decoy to allow us to escape. If he hadn't, we would all have died, and he had faith that if we managed to bring home what we found, it would protect you and Nona. Thank you, Riku. Marta mumbled tearfully. She nodded a slight bow, then fled into the village, her fatherless daughter in her arms. Once she was out of sight, Koron muttered as if in prayer. Ivan, he was a fine man. Yes, he had been a good man, and the wife he'd chosen was a good woman. She uttered no curses or grievances, neither did she harbor them. She just believed him. Their daughter, meanwhile, was a smart girl who could see the truth. She stared right at Riku and let him know what he was. A liar. Riku! Suddenly, with a violence that caught him off balance, Koron embraced him. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're safe. Yeah, here I am. With that, Koron opened her mouth exaggeratively in a deliberate attempt to change the subject. Right. It's time for you to take a bath. I'll get it ready. A bath? Alei cheered, but Riku frowned and grumbled. We can just wipe ourselves down. There's no need to waste fuel. Your big sister is telling you, take a bath. Frankly, you stink. Koron complained, stifling her own clothes as if worried it was coming off on her. Riku sighed, but trudged off obediently. When they had crossed the square and entered the terminus of the corridor, an older man spotted him and called out. Hey, Riku! It finally started working out for us. That heap of junk. Oh, come on, Simon. Why'd you have to tell him? I was hoping to surprise him. Working. You mean that telescope? Riku gaped, at which Koron held her head high. What do you expect from me? Well, you did explain the principle, Koron, but I still have no idea how you could put it together. Led by Simon, Riku climbed the stairs to the workshop built in the widened horizontal hollow of the cave. In its center, he saw a cylinder installed. About a year ago, they salvaged it from the wreckage of a dwarven tank, an ultra-long distance telescope. When they'd picked it up, it had been snapped down the middle, hardly more than rubbish. Riku asked, Are you sure it doesn't use spirits? Yeah, relax. It's like an ultra-advanced version of the telescope you were making. Basically, it uses a bunch of glass discs all stuck together in a complicated way. Let me tell you, I had to work to get the lens ratios right. I see. 2 people died for this. We better make the most of it. Corin had been there when they'd picked it up. It had been Corin who had identified it as an ultra-long-distance telescope and suggested bringing it back, and it had been Riku who had approved it. Then, to escape a werebeast threat they'd encountered on the way back, they'd sacrificed not 1, but 2. Even so, Simon brightly interjected, with this, we won't need to do as much scouting. Just think how happy they'll be. Yeah, that's true. He was lying. He knew how hard Corin had worked to repair this telescope. But it was a placebo. No matter how carefully his people proceeded, if they wanted to find them, it would take no time at all. Hell, even now, it was highly likely their whole Craig could be accidentally annihilated, just as his place of birth had been, and the land where he'd been raised. But seemingly aware of the thoughts plaguing Riku, Corin was chipper. It'll be so much easier to detect attacks. If we know in advance there'll be danger, we'll have time to get away, right? We've got to think about how we're going to use this, you know, man? Come on, let's go! They left the workshop. On the way to the personal quarters, Riku asked, what about the other expeditions? They're fine. You're the one who went the farthest. That makes this round almost perfect. Yeah, only that one mistake of mine. Riku's stolid expression, not particularly self-deprecating, made Corin hesitate. But, you brought back something to show for it, right? We found it in a drowned dwarven airship. We think it's a current world map. Huh? Really? That's huge, isn't it? Riku nodded at Corin's enthusiasm. With diagrams of where their forces are camped and their strategies explained in Dwarven, but some of it's in code. I'm going to need some time to figure it out, so leave me alone for a while. At these words, Corin's expression contorted in a rather complicated fashion. But seriously, take your bath, will you? 'Cause you stink. Holding her nose, Corin turned her back and took her leave. Riku just heaved a sigh. Entering his cramped room, Riku shut the door. The space had been tight to begin with, chiseled out of a cave, but it was even more oppressive for the countless books and tools now piled inside. In the center sat a small table for eating. At the end was a map-making desk. Beside it, a scrappy bed. He put the lantern on the desk, took off his pack, and lined up the various goods he'd procured, the star of the hall being 3 sheets of parchment, the map the 3 of them had copied together. He laid them out under the light of the lantern. No omissions, no stains, which meant Ivan's death had not been in vain. Riku exhaled deeply and looked around. No one was there. The room was somewhat distant from its neighbors, and the door was thick. After finishing his usual check, Riku took in a deep breath and touched his chest, and Kark opened his lock.